Hi, everyone. I will be presenting on the Peril Prize of AgTech, specifically looking at the Global South. Before we kind of get into my entire presentation, I kind of want to give you an idea of what inspired me to marry these things, specifically in the context of the Global South. And that is that I think that equity and AgTech have been married across time and space. And I'm really happy that I get to follow a day because we were on the same exact wavelength and thinking about this topic. And so I'm going to start because I can't help myself as an organizer to start with my call to action. And so my call to action is, and like my kind of moment of inspiration, optimism, is that the fourth agricultural revolution is our opportunity to intentionally and strategically center equity in the development of development and deployment of agricultural technology. And I say this given the multitude of lenses that I've had the privilege of having throughout my life, and to kind of give you an idea of what those are. Um, Talk to you a little bit about who I am. I'm an indigenous person from Vieques, Puerto Rico, who self-identifies as a colonial subject and a subject of development, from a food insecure community with intense environmental injustice due to a 70-year long history of being bombed by the US Navy. On top of that, I think that's like my personal context. My academic context is very much a soil nerd. Talk lots about carbon sequestration and what is regenerative agriculture in my more academic spheres, but really rooted in the international context, focusing on like big D development, if you're familiar with that term, and if not, we're going to talk about it a little bit. And on a kind of passion and what I do actively, and with most emphasis, is climate justice organizing. I have been introduced as, I was the founder of Latine, the Latina wing of the Sunrise Movement, and focus on trainings. So specifically mobilizing people around calls to action like the one I'm kind of going to move us towards during my talk. Crucial to how I approach organizing, and specifically in the climate sphere, is to uh, champion collective liberation. And in that, I mean, I believe that all struggles are intersectional and all struggles are interrelated. And to truly find justice, we must approach injustice at every level and address it. And so that kind of leads me into why we're talking about the fourth agricultural revolution. Well, we talk about it because we're in it, and we're in this really amazing time in which we have the opportunity to influence what we call technology, what we call innovation in this period. And so, from papers, both policy papers and media papers, we kind of get a sense of what the fourth agricultural revolution is looking like. And we've already discussed a lot of that earlier today. And that's like remote sensing, GIS, more digital. Calling it digital agricultural revolution is also a kind of synonymous with the fourth ag revolution. And the other part being information sharing and distributing tools. So cell phones, kind of just disseminating information via the internet, via local groups, etc. Another sort of something that's very important to the fourth agricultural revolution is small farmers. Up until the modern era, we had relatively small farmers. So now we see in papers that it's kind of the recognition that small farmers are both critical and endangered by land grabs and consolidation, etc. What we have been identified as goals are feeding a growing planet, which I think has been you'll see as a trend. I think is always a trend. Reduce inefficiencies, address knowledge gaps, and solve poverty and inequity, which I think is a kind of funny way of phrasing that. But I put in bold inequity here because there is, while this is always been an intention to a degree. The fact that we're kind of at least acknowledging that equity matters directly, I think is like a big push. And so here is kind of a graph from this great kind of this meta-analysis of thousands of papers throughout FAO, OECD, World Bank, and kind of what kind of transitions and transformations are being thought of, who those are being directed towards, and what are the problems and solutions that we're attempting to address and achieve. So next, why would we talk about the global South? And I put global South in quotations because I think it's really the terminology global South is so much a product of AgTech and former agricultural revolutions, right? So we'll talk a little bit about the Green Revolution and where this term comes from, but why we talk about the global South is because it's not only the global South, but the global majority. We see the predominant, the prevalence of food insecurity across the global South. Also, the environmental impact of the majority of the world farming in a certain way. To be clear, to be extremely clear, the global South, of course, has historically a much lower environmental impact, especially when it comes to the climate, than what we would consider the global North. But it's something that is also something we have to consider and be really thoughtful about when we implement technologies across the world. And lastly, I think, and most importantly, when we're having these conversations around equity, is recognizing historic inequity, given that the global South has been the recipients of kind of the short end of the stick in terms of colonialism and neoliberal globalization. So now that we know a little bit about what the fourth revolution is, the context of why we should care, like what the global South is and why we should care about it in the conversation, kind of marrying history with what the global South has become or how it's been created. So the Green Revolution really was the deployment of what we would think of as modern agronomic technologies, things like higher yielding varieties. We like champion Norman Borlaug as like the hero of the Green Revolution. And in theory, there were similar goals to what we're seeing with the fourth agricultural revolution, which is reducing inequity, making more food, more efficiency, all of this with a particular emphasis on the global South due to the historical context, that being post-World War II and like decolonization of like sub-Saharan Africa. And the outcomes, however, we've already have the outcomes of that we've already kind of been able to see, right? The Green Revolution is coming to not to an end, but we're transitioning, right? So our outcomes have been iffy on the issue of food insecurity and global and poverty globally, right? We would like to believe that it has reduced insecurity and poverty, but that it's not really a consensus, and definitely hasn't been even results. And more so, I think the more lasting consequences that the Green Revolution really cemented those inequities that existed prior to the Green Revolution, those kinds of the top down and very much what we would call developed countries having dominance both economically, technologically, etc., over developing worlds. And so we really just recreated and solidified those extractive colonial economies that we were trying to improve upon and improve people's well-being from. So that's kind of the context that we have currently and that we're kind of working out of. And so when I think about this, I think about this like classic Audre Lorde quote, which is "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." And so we really, in the Green Revolution, we implemented changes that as our disproportionate influence as the developed world or global north had would help the global south, and really we didn't get the results that we expected to. And like having this information, we're armed with the knowledge to do something different and do something better. So what were like our big learnings and things that we can really take into the fourth agricultural revolution to achieve the goals that we've already stated and we've seen throughout these policy papers, and we've seen even before into the green revolution, right? So things that worked really well and things that were necessary were local and indigenous knowledge, which I'm sure like a day prefaced and spoke like gave so much great historical context for. Holistic analysis of well-being beyond market participation, right? This is kind of why it's been really difficult to quantify the impacts of the green revolution as far as poverty goes. If we're only looking at people's ability to purchase things, that doesn't really equate to how good your life is in general. This third one I think is like a really fun one, which is like this less techie agricultural solutions. So we find that like while in the United States and in the global north, we have immense mechanic capabilities that are highly technological. Those haven't really diffused to every corner of the planet for a holistic whole sorts of reasons. And so in terms of what has been most successful, things that are less mechanical and less techie, different than technological in this context, have been more effective. Democratizing information has been incredibly effective, and has like that's something that's a common thread into our new deployment of the fourth agricultural revolution. And like the last key learning is we need an emphasis on climate and justice when we go about these initiatives. That is something that is a departure from the Green Revolution. I'm so sorry. Is a departure from the Green Revolution. Sorry, I'm off on time. So here are just examples of AgTech or different kinds of ways in which we can view development that go beyond this, kind of circumnavigate the downfalls of the Green Revolution initiatives and champion these kinds of key learnings. So on your left, there's this biochar. Biochar is like kind of really hot in terms of when we talk about soil regeneration and we talk about like kind of innovative agronomic technologies. Obviously, it's not something new. Indigenous folks have been doing biochar for millennia. However, making it accessible in the form of biochar ovens, like the program I was kind of involved in Kenya, is a form of agricultural technology that kind of suits this this transition towards more equitable and more sustainable approaches to tech. On the right, there's Heifer International. This is like a cow from Heifer International. And really, I think like they're a great example of information dissemination. All of these programs have like their pros and cons, but I think these really highlight forms of tech that have proven to be successful and that we can really kind of mobilize and expand in the fourth agricultural revolution. And then these are a couple more. So one that's super, super famous in sub-Saharan Africa is Farm Radio. They have millions of listeners doing straight information dissemination. It is incredibly successful, especially, and I think this is a great way to point out the difference, like why I put techie in quotations, because I think obviously in the 90s, thinking of farmers and around the world, everyone having a cell phone was wild, but now that is our reality. So cell phone technology is not excessively techie, I think, in the modern context. And kind of coupling that with things on the right, which are, this is in Myanmar, the local universities developing kind of low-tech homemade fertilizers and being able to distribute this in a way like farm radio does. Obviously, like Myanmar is like kind of developing more digital technologies now that they're in a new era nationally. I think these are ways in which we can learn different strategies amongst the global South. And so, yeah, so I think with that, I would like to kind of leave you with one of my favorite Zapatista quotes, which is Un mundo donde quepan muchos mundos, which is like just a reminder, which means a world in which many worlds kind of fit in, which is just a reminder that while there's so much that we've learned from the Green Revolution, there is nothing like, my first point in learning is locality and indigeneity is chief amongst having like really sustainable and fruitful outcomes when it comes to improving well-being across the country, or across the globe. And yeah, just I think like my emphasis with this is to really champion indigeneity and local efforts in the fourth agricultural revolution. So thank you. I think that's my time.